On a humid August night in 1851, a slave trader in Southside, Virginia, inked a line that should not have existed, and yet could only have existed there. One specimen, age approximately 19, purchased at Charleston Market. Unique physical characteristics. Price $28,470. The figure alone, in a tidy hand too calm for what it meant, said more than the rest. Nearly 4 times the going rate, paid without a quiver. Beneath it, buyer, Thomas Rutled, Belmont Estate. Belmont sat at the county's eastern edge where the tobacco lands gave up their long rows to oak and pine. The house, red brick, white columns, black shutters, had the symmetry of old money and the quiet arrogance of a family that remembered 1783 as if it were yesterday. 42 enslaved people kept the place moving like a clock. Fires lit before dawn, fences mended by noon. Leaves hung in curing barns before the evening thunder announced itself across a sky the color of bruised tin. From the front steps, the world looked orderly. From behind the kitchen door, it looked like what it was. Thomas Rutled, age 37, had inherited Belmont 7 years prior, along with debts his father called temporary weather, and his mother called God's discipline. Thomas never learned which of them was right. He paid anyway. First with tobacco, then with timber, then with a dowry. Catherine, 10 years his junior, the pale, elegant daughter of a Richmond merchant whose ship stitched coastlines into coin. Their marriage did what the banknotes could not, staved off collapse, yet left untouched the hollowness that had been growing. Grain by grain, inside each of them since long before they met. By August of 51, that hollowness was the quiet language of the house. Catherine moved like a drawn curtain, present, translucent, always between the world and itself. She had been altered by grief 2 years earlier, when a stillborn son turned her body into an echo chamber, where every sound afterward was sorrow. Thomas wore his emptiness like a well-cut coat. You could barely see it unless you knew where to look. The longer stare. The glass left unfinished. The way he sat sometimes in his office, with a paper before him and forgot to write his name. The trader who arrived that month was named Wickham, a thin man in a black suit that had seen better days and a face that had not. He dealt in what he called specialty acquisitions, people he described with the cool patience of a man assessing carriages, unusual skill, remarkable temperament, a rare case from a physician's estate. He talked tobacco prices first, then national politics, how the Union strained like a rope and how men who owned land should think ahead, as if prudence could outpace history. Only when Thomas offered a second glass of whiskey did Wickham lean forward and begin to draw the circle that would close around them all. "I've acquired something," he said, eyes gleaming with a merchant's pride that did not bother to conceal itself. Not a field hand, not kitchen staff, a phenomenon. He produced a bill of sale from Charleston and spoke the names like incantations. Dr. Albert Strad, New Orleans. Estate sale. Documentation, compliance. The young person, specimen in the ledger. But Jordan, in the mouth of anyone who could not bear the other word, had been raised in a household, taught to read and write, and presented to physicians since childhood as proof of what medical men whispered about and longed to see, a body that could not be sorted cleanly into male or female. Wickham let silence pull tight between them, then plucked the string. "A medical curiosity, Mr. Rutled. One in thousands. Possibly tens of thousands. You, sir, could own it." Thomas had expected to feel disgust or at least outrage at the crudity. He felt neither. The sensation that moved through him was stranger than desire and colder than fear. Here was a shape that might name his own wordless blank. Both and neither, one and not one. A perfect ambiguity you could point at and say, "There, I'll need to see," Thomas said, managing the old planter's tone. Impersonal. Precise. 20 minutes later, Jordan stood in the office doorway, bare feet pressed together, hands clasped, eyes lowered. The cotton shift concealed and revealed by turns, but the face could not be argued with. Cheekbones fine as cut glass, a mouth too soft for one box, too firm for the other, lashes that cast shadows long enough to be mistaken for bruises if you wanted them to be. When Wickham ordered Jordan to speak, the voice came as if from the seam between registers. Clear, trained, impossible. My name is Jordan, Master. I am 19. I can read, write, and cipher. I have been trained for examination. I will not resist. The prepared speech made the room colder. In the pause after, Thomas understood, like the first step into a river you thought shallow, that he had already moved farther than he meant. "I'll take it," he heard himself say, the pronoun small and the verb ruinous. By noon the draft had been signed. The papers folded and handed over with the satisfied nod of a man who believed in markets the way others believed in God. Wickham left. The office door clicked shut. The silence that followed contained the outline of what Belmont would become. Thomas did not walk Jordan past the quarters, where evening laughter tried to outrun dread. He took the garden path to a cottage once occupied by his father's valet and empty for years. The windows faced the hedges faced the house. It was private and near, the kind of place you choose when you want to pretend to yourself you're not hiding. "You'll stay here," he said. "I'll send word about your duties." "Yes, Master." The room smelled of old soap and lavender left in a bowl long ago. A narrow bed, a chair, a washstand. Sunlight came in through the wavy glass in strips like missing pages. For a moment Thomas stood as if the arrangement required blessing. It did not. He turned away. At dinner he told Catherine only what he had decided he could bear to say, avoiding the shoreline where language becomes confession. "An educated house slave," he began. "From a physician's estate, useful. Unusual." She raised her eyes then, searching his face the way a careful reader searches a paragraph for a word that will unlock the rest. "What kind of unusual?" "Medical," he said at last, summoning all the neutrality he could. "A rare birth condition. Documented." Catherine's mouth tightened. Curiosity brushed the edge of annoyance and dissolved into something harder to name. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll see." Morning made the cottage seem smaller. Catherine stepped into it as if crossing a threshold in a chapel. Not devotion, not reverence. Something like it and not like it at all. Jordan stood with hands folded still as a held note. The ambiguity that had pierced Thomas worked as cruelly on her, but differently. For him the sight was a riddle. For her it was a reflection, one more proof that the world refused to hold steady at its edges. "What are you?" she asked quietly, and the question was the wrongness of the age summed up in 5 words. Jordan did not look up. "What you need me to be, mistress." Catherine flinched, as if the careful politeness had the bite of a slap. She circled once, twice. At her nod, Jordan turned, lifted an arm, lowered it. She asked about the physician's notes. Thomas answered. She asked to examine. Thomas hesitated, and then allowed what he pretended to believe was a matter of fact and not of desire. She touched cautiously at first, the clinical curiosity she had cultivated in novels and salons, but her fingertips were not made of theory. They were made of skin. No one spoke afterward on the walk back to the house. That night the marriage bed, which had been a tomb, stirred, not with tenderness but with the feral energy of 2 people clutching the same secret to stay afloat. It was not love. It was not even comfort. It was a bargain the body makes with the dark. If I move, I am not dead. Within days, a new pattern rose like mold. Jordan was moved into the big house, 3rd floor, and of the hall, a room that would later be sealed at law. Officially, Catherine's maid, practically in orbit with 2 sons and no mercy. Better food arrived on a tray each morning. Better clothes were fitted by a seamstress who accepted coin with eyes politely averted. The household adjusted with the wordless agility of people who survived, by noticing without naming. The enslaved women shifted to fill Catherine's absences in the parlor. The field hands learned to look past the master when he walked the rows, as if inside a story only he could see. In the kitchen, Harriet, cook, midwife, keeper of what others refused to remember, watched the threads slip. She had served 3 generations of Rutleds, and knew that one kind of cruelty wore a whip and another wore velvet. She caught Jordan at the door one morning, tray balanced, wrists careful. "Child," she said softly, every consonant a guarded step. "They hurting you up there?" Jordan's gaze didn't rise. "I have everything I need, Aunt Harriet." "That ain't what I asked." A flicker moved across Jordan's face, pain or the rehearsal of it. Then the blankness, polished smooth as a coin. "I do what I was trained to do. It's easier when you don't think." Bootsteps crossed the hall above. The tray went up the stairs. Harriet held onto the table until the room steadied. That night the quarters whispered. Some remembered old stories of conjure and shadow. Some said, "Don't be a fool. This is just another way a master takes." All of them knew danger when it walked. Upstairs, the obsessions took different shapes. Thomas found a medical bookseller in Richmond who didn't ask why a planter wanted treatises on ambiguous anatomies and endocrine mysteries. He read until the candles stuttered, then sketched and noted in a journal he locked in a drawer and later fed to fire. Catherine turned to costume. She dressed Jordan in styles that insisted on one reading or the other, then in garments that collapsed the distinction entirely. She worked at the hair and then at the gaze, as if arranging the frame might make the picture settle. Nothing settled. "I want to understand what you are," she whispered once, so close that even the word use seemed a trespass. Jordan, hands at sides, spoke without rancor. "Does it matter, mistress? I am what you see. I am what you want to see. And what do you see?" The pause stretched, a bridge between cliffs no one could cross. Something people examine so they do not have to examine themselves. Outside, September ground into October with harvest and rain. Inside, the house decayed in ways polite society could ignore for a season, and never forever. Thomas missed a meeting, then two. Bills piled, some opened, some pushed under papers as if shadow could make them evaporate. Catherine withdrew from visits and then from meals, from church and then from afternoons, until her world was a corridor and a room, and the sound of a voice pitched between. When two brothers, Samuel and Isaac, ran for the road and were dragged back in chains, Thomas stood by because plantation order required it. And then he stood by because he could do nothing else. 10 lashes each, the overseer counting and the assembled watching, grief and rage pressed flat into silence. After, Thomas stared at the post as if it were an instrument from a discipline he didn't recognize anymore. Harriet saw him from the kitchen window and understood the worst kind of truth. A master who has lost the will to master is a storm cloud without a path. You don't know where it will break. That night arguing rose through the house like heat. Not the loud ordinary kind, this was a ragged tearing. The next morning Jordan came to the kitchen moving as if every step had to be negotiated with the floor. Harriet met those careful eyes and felt the cold of a future arriving before it was time. By late October, the estate still looked like a place where success visited on Sundays. The fences stood, most of them. The barns were full, more or less. The main road packed hard with wagon ruts. But anyone who lived by reading rooms could see what had shifted. The servants became the skeleton that held the house upright. Orders grew vague. Execution became the only plan. News traveled in its own channels. The minister had been turned away. Invitations went unanswered. Neighbors whispered about Catherine's health and Thomas's drinking, and pretended not to notice when both explanations failed. Jordan endured. That was the word in the work. The training for compliance had been more than lessons. It had been a re-engineering of attention. You could stand where you were put and let the world run currents through you without calling them yours. It is a terrible skill, and sometimes the only one that saves a life. In the first week of November, Catherine asked the question she had avoided, because the answer would condemn them both. "Do you hate us?" "Thomas and me?" Jordan looked at a point beyond her shoulder, the way people do when they refuse to reflect what will break another person. "Hate needs room to move, mistress. It belongs to people who believe they deserve better. I was taught I don't, so no, I endure you." The truth of it opened a hollow in Catherine deeper than any grief she had named. She slept less. She ate in gestures. She went to the window and found only her own outline there. When snow came early in January, the roads vanished under white silence. The house, cut off from its obligations, surrendered the last of its pretense. Thomas stopped managing entirely. Catherine stopped leaving the third floor. Jordan continued, the way a wheel continues even as the cart that once held it breaks apart. But the silence the storm brought also opened gaps where words could enter. One night, when Thomas's self-loathing pushed him to the boundary between cruelty and collapse, Jordan chose the only weapon left, speech. "You and the mistress are enslaved to this," they said, not harshly. "You call me property because the law says so. Your desires own you more completely than any paper owns me." Thomas raised a hand. The gesture trembled, a ruin of itself. Punishment could not restore the fiction of order. He lowered it and left. By then, the enslaved community had begun what the wise always do when weather turns. They prepared. Shoes were mended. Food was put aside. Directions were rehearsed in whispers. Some planned to wait for a clearer sign. Some planned not to wait at all. Surviving is not a single skill. It is an orchestra, and every instrument must be tuned. On a raw afternoon, Harriet stepped into Thomas's study, not as a supplicant this time, but as a woman who had helped bring babies through fever and had more authority than the papers on his desk. "Master," she said, eyes down because the world required it, voice steady because truth required that too. "What you and the mistress got with that child, Jordan, it's killing all three of you. Sell Jordan away. End it before it ends you." For a heartbeat, Thomas's face broke open and showed its true map. He knew she was right. The knowledge did not make him able. "Leave me," he whispered. She did, because there was nothing left to give that he would take. On the 14th of February, cold rain lashing the windows, sky lowering like a verdict. The story bent toward the shape it had been carving since the ledger line was written. But that belongs to another telling. It began with a key and a lie. The key was brass, heavy enough to impress the palm, light enough to disappear in a pocket. Thomas pressed it into Catherine's hand the morning Jordan moved into the big house. "For your maid," he said, as if the word maid could domesticate what he had brought through their door. The lie was smaller, so small it traveled in tone more than language. His promise, to her and to himself, that the arrangement would be orderly, that curiosity could be managed like a ledger, that the line they would not cross could be named and observed. Before noon, the key turned in the third-floor lock. The room at the end of the corridor was narrow and bright, a dormer window throwing pale rectangles across the floor. Someone had dressed it quickly, fresh linen, a washstand, a chair by the small fire whose work was more symbolic than effective in February's cold. The house had always kept its secrets on the top floor. Servants knew which footsteps to avoid and which silences to keep. Now the house held its breath. Jordan stood in the threshold with the stillness of someone taught that stillness is safety. Catherine motioned to the bed and to the wardrobe. A new dress folded inside, a plain shirt and trousers beside it. "We'll see what suits your duties," she said, too brisk, as if briskness could turn strangeness into routine. She did not look at Thomas. He did not ask to stay. They both pretended that leaving Jordan here alone placed the new gravity far from them. Gravity does not respect distance. Within a week, the third-floor room acquired rules. They were never written and seldom spoken, but they governed everything. The door remained locked unless Catherine was present. Jordan took meals either in silence with Catherine or on a tray carried upstairs at set times. The room was to be kept immaculate, windows open to air out the scent of lamp oil and bodies between visits. When Catherine rang, Jordan came. When Thomas arrived, Catherine did not remain long. At first, downstairs, the household shifted to accommodate the new rhythm. Delia, who had spent years dressing Catherine's hair and noting the weather in her mistress's temples, was reassigned to the parlor, to mending, to the polite erasure of a woman's closest attendant when a new presence takes that place. She learned quickly not to ask after Catherine's headaches. Not to mention that Jordan now fetched the hot stones for aching hands, the lavender for sleeplessness, the basin for tears. Harriet measured the change in more practical terms. Butter spoiled when it never had before, because the mistress no longer took bread in the morning. A haunch went to waste because Thomas forgot to invite the neighboring planter he'd promised dinner. The cook counted such things not because she loved waste. No one who had lived long on the edge of power loved waste, but because they signaled a house losing its memory. When a house forgets its habits, peril follows. The enslaved men noticed it differently. The master's inspection of the rows became haphazard. Tools went unrepaired because orders never quite arrived. On the second Saturday after Jordan's move, Samuel asked the overseer for permission to visit his wife at a neighboring plantation. The overseer refused without consulting Thomas. It was a small thing. It became the first crack that men like Samuel and Isaac measured with their feet. A week later they ran. A patroller's lantern found them on a red road, and iron brought them back. Thomas watched the whipping with a face that wanted to be absent. The overseer counted. The assembled counted silently with him, the way people count thunder to locate the storm. When the lashes were done, and the men were led away to water an old cloth, Thomas stood alone as if the post might tell him what he had forgotten. Harriet from the kitchen window saw the look of a man who had crossed a line he could not name, and now hated both the crossing and himself. That night voices rose in the house like heat. The argument was muffled by layers of floorboards and propriety, but its shape could be heard anywhere people learned to survive by listening. Catherine's voice thin and breaking and Thomas's blunt and scraping, two tools ill-suited to the same task. The servants flinched at the sound, not because arguments were new, but because this one seemed to have no object. They were not fighting over the plantation or a bill or a visit declined. They were fighting over a void. The next morning, Catherine did not come down. She sent Jordan for tea and stayed in the chair by the third-floor window, wrapped in a shawl, although the fire burned hot. When Jordan set the tray beside her, she reached out impulsively and caught the young person's wrist, as if steadying herself against a fall. "What are we doing?" she whispered. Not to Jordan, really, but to the air that separated her from the part of herself that still recognized a mirror. "Tell me and I will stop." Jordan's face did not offer comfort. Comfort cannot be coerced from someone who has learned that comfort is another name for surrender. "You are asking me to give a name to what you chose," they said simply. "Names are for the powerful." Catherine flinched and let go. She drank the tea after it cooled. In those weeks, Thomas read texts shipped from Richmond, copied sketches from Europe, case reports filled with the ornate misery of men describing bodies like collections. He told himself he studied to understand. He told himself he was a modern man. That knowledge freed the mind from superstition, and could therefore free the soul. He did not admit that every page brought him closer to the third-floor room, lending the intimacy an alibi. He began keeping a journal. He labeled entries with dates and temperature and observations as if precision could absolve him. He locked the book between uses. He washed his hands more often. Catherine studied different things. She watched how a part in Jordan's hair altered the line of the jaw, how a collar redrew the throat, how posture retaught the eye where to look. She learned how to arrange Jordan to reassure herself. This is a woman, because look, and then to disprove the same claim 15 minutes later. It became a game with no laughter in it. When she tired of tailoring the frame, she tried to tailor the gaze, asking Jordan to look at her this way, then that. Compassion, severity, absence, desire. Jordan complied with quiet efficiency, not because obedience made it safe, but because it made it survivable. Choice had long ago been removed from the menu. All that remained was timing. "Do you pray?" Catherine asked one afternoon, exhausted by her own inquiries. "I have prayed as I was taught," Jordan said. "Then I learned something else instead." "What?" "How to outlast. If the house had not been cut off by weather, perhaps the spiral would have uncoiled in public, exposed by routine, interrupted by an unexpected guest, diluted by Christmas visits and county business. But snow arrived in January like a door closing. The road became a white channel no wagon dared. Letters made it as far as Farmville, and waited there like birds on a wire, uncertain which way the wind would go. Inside Belmont, silence thickened and altered, the way a quiet can shift from peace to threat without changing volume. Catherine stopped pretending to manage the household. She left her hair unpinned and no one corrected her. She wore dark dresses not because mourning suited her, but because any color felt like a lie. She ate only when Jordan insisted, and then only what politeness demanded, 3 bites. Then the napkin pressed to lips that had nothing to hide, and no truth to tell. Thomas retreated to the study and then to the third-floor landing, where he sometimes stood with his palm against the grain of the door, as if pressing could transmit meaning through wood. When he did enter, he was at his worst and his best. Gentle questions asked too hard. Careful observations made too close. Sometimes he paced and spoke aloud about phrenology and classification and God's sense of humor. Sometimes he sat and watched Jordan breathe, as if the rhythm itself contained a key. On those nights, Catherine stayed only minutes before the heat in her cheeks drove her out, past the linen closet. Down the stairs she had climbed as a bride. The enslaved people prepared as people do when a storm lingers and the barometer reads disaster. Boots were patched. A little meal was hidden beneath floorboards. Routes were traced in memory. Creek north, pine with the split trunk cut left at the rock with the iron vein. Survival is not a single act. It is a calendar, and every day on it must be marked. Harriet waited until the afternoon. The light failed early and courage was cheap. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked down the hall to Thomas's study. She knocked because form must be kept even when truth is about to trespass. "Master Rutled," she said when he looked up, eyes red from reading and a glass untouched beside the ledger. "I need to speak plain." He almost smiled. Harriet had earned the right if anyone had. "Go on. What you and the mistress doing with that child ain't right," she said, calm and steady. "It's killing all three. You sell that one away if you want to live. That's the mercy left to you." For a moment he looked like a man grateful to be told what to do. Then the wave passed and left him the wreck he had been becoming since August. "Leave me," he said, shame rasping the words thin. She did, because she had carried her warning like a bowl of water to his door, and could not make him drink without drowning herself. For a moment he looked like a man grateful to be told what to do. Then the wave passed and left him the wreck he had been becoming since August. "Leave me," he said, shame rasping the words thin. She did, because she had carried her warning like a bowl of water to his door and could, not make him drink without drowning herself. The break came in, the form of a visitor and the kind of weather old men called doctors. Weather, cold rain with wind that slaps shutters just enough to remind you your house is wood and not a fortress. Dr. Edmund. Carlyle arrived from Richmond in a mud-spattered carriage, mutton chops white against a red scarf, eyes the careful blue of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He was an old friend of Thomas's father, and had written in that capacity weeks earlier, offering sympathy about finances and offering, too, the wrong kind of help, professional attention to an unnamed curiosity. Thomas, who might have ignored any other letter, had written back. He dressed the obsession in Latin and asked for judgment the way a sinner thinks a priest will cure desire by naming it. They dined together by a fire. Thomas spoke too quickly, the way a man speaks when he is trying to get ahead of his own confession. He used the words of the books, true hermaphroditism, concurrence, phenotype, and avoided the words common to men, want, shame, ruin. Carlyle listened and grew uneasy. He had seen misery dressed in science before and knew that a coat changes no man's bones. "I would like to examine the person," Carlyle said after the second glass of brandy. "If it is agreeable." Thomas seized the chance for permission. "Say," the invitation said without saying. "Say I am not a monster. Say I am a man of learning." The third-floor room received them like a confessional. Catherine was already there, thin and bright-eyed, her beauty reduced to angles and insistence. Jordan stood by the bed, hands folded. Carlyle's manner shifted as he crossed the threshold. His voice softened, and his hands, when he asked Jordan to turn or to sit, carried the respectful gravity of a physician who has learned that dignity is the first treatment. His notes were brief. His look at Thomas was longer. "A remarkable case," he said quietly when they were in the study again. "Rare, worthy of documentation." Thomas's chest rose, a relief he mistook for absolution. Carlyle did not oblige the mistake. "Your house is wrong," he said, setting the glass down as if to keep his hands from betraying too much feeling. "Not the architecture. The air. Your wife looks unwell. You look consumed. This, whatever you tell yourself it is not medicine. It is an obsession, and it is killing you. Jordan is my property," Thomas said reflexively, appalled by how flat the words sounded in the doctor's presence, as if spoken by a poorer version of himself. "There are moral lines," Carlyle replied, sadness overtaking authority. "Even here, especially here. You are stepping past them and calling it study. Stop before you cannot." The conversation did not improve. It could not. When belief is the bridge over a chasm, you do not remove planks. You run faster. Carlyle left in rain the next morning, thinking to write a letter to a magistrate, then not writing because the law had no room for what he had seen. He told his coachman to drive on and decided to be a coward, in the way men who live long often are, by choosing not to intervene when intervention will cost them their standing. His departure left emptier silence. Catherine felt the rebuke like fever. It shook her and then settled in her bones. Thomas received it like a wound he could not treat and could not ignore. They did not speak of Carlyle again, but the house did. Doors closed with more insistence. The stair creaked like a reprimand. The third-floor corridor collected cold that no hearth answered. February brought thaw, then rain, then the kind of gray day that leaches definition from everything it touches. In the quarters, women spoke in low tones about running soon, before planting knotted them to the land again. In the big house, Catherine's hands shook when she threaded a needle, and Jordan covered for her, taking the work without comment. Thomas slept in bursts and woke with his palm already reaching for a key he had not carried since August. On the morning of the 14th, a stillness came over Catherine that the servants recognized from childbirth and death. The calm that is not peace, but the cessation of struggle before an event that will not be turned aside. Delia offered tea. Catherine declined with a small, grateful smile that terrified the woman more than any outburst would have. Harriet prayed without words while she kneaded dough she would not bake until late. By evening, the wind picked up. Rain hammered at the shutters and found a rhythm. The house listened. On the third floor, Catherine sat with Jordan and spoke as if the two of them were alone in a world that had stripped them of every other audience. "I cannot go on," she said, voice steadier than it had been in months. "Every breath tastes of what we have done." "Then leave," Jordan said softly. "Run the way any trapped person runs." Catherine closed her eyes and smiled without relief. "Where do I go with myself?" She went to the dresser. The pistol's weight told Jordan what words could not. Jordan stood, hands open, as if showing emptiness might disarm grief. It did not. Thunder shook the sash. The lamp guttered and steadied. The barrel flickered in and out of shadow. Thomas came through the door at a run, wet from the courtyard, eyes suddenly clear the way a drunk's eyes clear when the house is actually on fire. He spoke her name as if it might tether her. Catherine answered with the truth that had been growing like mold since August. "We are poison. Everything we touch rots." She lifted the pistol and her hands stilled. The quiet kind of decision no speech unmakes. What followed belongs to the ledger of another chapter. The sound. The fall. The 17 hours between breath and its absence. The doctor's hollow comfort. The hush that follows a first terrible end. For now, it is enough to say that the third-floor room fulfilled the rule of all closed rooms, where people teach themselves to mistake examination for love. It kept the secret until it tore the house apart. And that after the shot echoed down the stairs, every person at Belmont, master, mistress, enslaved, child, understood in their own language that a line once described as theoretical had finally cut the world in two. The gunshot did not echo far. It stayed within the bones of the house, rolling up the stairwell, pressed into the wood and then seemed to vanish. But the silence that followed spread farther than any sound could reach. The 17 hours, Catherine Rutled, did not die right away. The pistol had been angled just enough to spare her for reasons no one would ever decide. Bad aim, divine cruelty, or the body's refusal to grant mercy. The shot tore upward beneath her jaw and through the soft tissue of thought and prayer, leaving her suspended between worlds. Thomas fell to his knees beside her. The sound that came from him was not language. Jordan stood frozen near the window, arms half raised in an instinct of protection that had come too late for anyone. Rain beat harder against the panes, and in each flash of lightning the scene rearranged itself like a painting unfinished. Catherine's body collapsed beside the bed, the floor slick and blackening beneath her. Thomas bent over her with trembling hands, and Jordan watching as if witnessing the punishment of a story told too often to disbelieve. When the household slaves came running, Harriet at the front, Thomas turned on them like a trapped animal. "Out," he shouted, his voice hoarse and breaking. "Out, all of you. Fetch the doctor, but none come back till I send word." No one argued. They scattered like leaves caught in storm wind. Harriet sent a boy on horseback into the downpour toward Farmville, whispering prayers to any god who might listen, to the cries of people who weren't supposed to pray aloud. Thomas lifted Catherine onto the bed with a gentleness that would have shamed him if he had been capable of reflection. He pressed torn linen to her neck, his hands slick with what he told himself he could still stop. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Catherine, listen," Stay. But her eyes had rolled upward, seeing not him, not the room, not anything that belonged to the living. When she tried to speak, only a wet, broken hiss came out. Like air escaping a cracked pipe, he told himself she was answering. He lied because truth had no purpose anymore. Jordan moved at last. "Let me help," they said softly, taking a basin and clean cloths from the dresser. Thomas didn't respond, didn't even look up as Jordan washed the blood away, working with the mechanical tenderness of someone who has done this before, perhaps for others, perhaps in dreams. There was no anger, no fear, just motion. When the task was done, Jordan sat quietly by the window, waiting for what would come next. Hours passed. The rain turned to a steady drizzle, then to fog. By the time Dr. Alton, the local physician, arrived near midnight, Catherine's breathing had settled into the hollow rasp that doctors recognize as farewell. He examined her by candlelight, muttering in the practiced tone of men who believe that words can reassert control. "No hope of recovery," he said at last, his hands folding neatly as if sealing a letter. "There's nothing to be done but wait." Thomas's face crumpled, but he did not weep. He sat beside her until dawn, whispering apologies as though repetition might amount to penance. "I'm sorry," he kept saying over and over, to her still face, to the air, to the sound of his own voice. Jordan changed the compresses without comment. When morning came, Catherine's breathing stopped with one small sigh, almost polite, as if excusing herself from the conversation. Thomas did not move. He sat there long enough for the light to shift from gray to gold, for the last candle to sputter and die, and for the house to understand it now belonged to ghosts. The doctor's record doctor, Alton wrote a single-page report for the county office. Accidental discharge of a firearm, resulting in mortal injury to Mrs. Catherine Rutled of Belmont Plantation, Prince Edward County. It was a lie everyone agreed to repeat. Suicide brought scandal. Scandal brought inquiry. Inquiry brought shame. And in Virginia, shame was worse than sin. When the magistrate arrived 2 days later, he accepted the account without question. He had known the family for decades. His wife had once danced with Catherine at a harvest ball. "A tragedy," he said softly, touching Thomas's shoulder. "Such accidents happen. She was not well these past months, I hear." Thomas nodded. It was easier than explaining that "not well" was too small a phrase for what had lived in that house. The coroner's note was filed quietly under misfortune domestic. No autopsy. No inquest. Just a certificate signed in trembling ink. A document that washed guilt clean in the eyes of men who wanted peace more than justice. The enslaved workers watched from the shadows as the coffin was carried down the staircase. No one spoke. They had seen their share of death, but this felt different. Not a punishment, not an accident, but something summoned. The master followed the coffin to the churchyard, his face the color of unpolished marble, his eyes refusing the sky. Jordan walked behind him, not as servant, not as mourner, something else. Something for which language had not yet been invented. The funeral rain came again the morning they buried her, soft and thin as gauze. Christ Church in Farmville filled with neighbors who whispered behind gloved hands. Women dabbed their eyes and spoke of delicate health, of nerves, of the tragic tendency of fragile hearts to fail before their time. No one mentioned the smell of gunpowder or the blood that had soaked into the third-floor boards. They spoke instead of heaven, of mercy, of peace that passeth understanding. Thomas sat in the front pew like a statue carved to mourn its own maker. When the minister read from Corinthians, "For now we see through a glass darkly," his hands clenched once, then went still. Jordan stood at the back, away from the pews, head bowed. To anyone watching, they were simply another servant fulfilling duty. But Harriet, standing beside them, saw what others could not. The faint tremor in Jordan's jaw, the effort of holding still when the world demanded invisibility. She reached out and touched the sleeve of Jordan's coat just once, the gesture both comfort and apology. Jordan did not look at her, but the smallest nod passed between them, enough to say, "We survive what we must." Afterward, at the graveside, the minister's voice carried over the open earth. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The wind lifted the last of the rain from the branches and scattered it across the mourners like a blessing misplaced. The fire and the ledger that night. After the neighbors left and the servants returned to their quarters, Thomas went to his study. The house was silent except for the sigh of settling timbers. On the desk lay the papers that had bound his past to his present, the ledger of purchases, letters from Wickham, receipts, the physician's records from Charleston, and his own journal. He opened the ledger to the first entry, the one that began it all. One specimen, age approximately 19. He stared at the line until the ink blurred, until it seemed to float like a wound that refused to heal. Then he opened the fireplace and began to feed the pages in one by one. The fire took them eagerly, curling the edges, turning words into black dust. Wickham's receipt, Dr. Stradd's notes, Catherine's letters. The journal filled with sketches of what should never have been sketched. Each vanished in a flare of orange, each replaced by the smell of burning oil and guilt. When it was done, he sat for a long time watching the embers fade. He thought of throwing himself into the ashes to follow her. Instead, he poured another drink and made a list, his only remaining skill. Sell Belmont. Disperse property. Dismiss servants. Keep Jordan. He stopped there, uncertain why he had written the last line. Perhaps because it was the only piece of the story that still breathed. Perhaps because some part of him believed that if Jordan remained, someone would remember. Someone must remember. The sale within the week, word spread that Belmont Estate was for sale. The news puzzled the county. Thomas Rutled, the man who had once spoken of legacy and bloodline, now wanted nothing more than to flee his inheritance. A merchant from Petersburg offered half its value. Thomas accepted without hesitation. Before the sale was finalized, he gave 3 orders. First, the third-floor room was to be emptied and sealed. The bloodstains had resisted scrubbing, dark ghosts beneath the floorboards. So he instructed the workers to sand and paint over them, then lock the door and throw away the key. "No one enters again," he said, his voice flat. "Write it in the deed." The merchant agreed, thinking it eccentric but harmless. Second, all papers concerning the estate between August 1851 and February 1852 were to be destroyed. "Irrelevant," Thomas explained to the lawyer. "Personal notes? My late wife's correspondence." The lawyer, who understood the value of discretion, burned them in the courthouse stove without reading a line. Third, the enslaved workers were to be sold separately, families divided among neighboring plantations. He did it quietly, without announcement, like a man closing windows before a storm. The people he had known for years, Harriet, Dilea, Isaac, Samuel, were reduced again to inventory. When the wagons left, the quarters fell silent, the smoke from their chimneys dying one by one until only Jordan remained. The ghosts that breathed Thomas took a smaller house in Lynchburg, modest, brick, forgettable. He brought with him 3 servants, 2 elderly men too frail to fetch a price, and Jordan, the embodiment of everything he could neither forgive nor release. Their days followed a mechanical rhythm. Meals prepared, errands run, words exchanged only when necessary. Thomas lived in the parlor or the study, writing letters he never sent. Jordan occupied a small room upstairs. The air between them was neither master nor servant. It was a void filled with the echo of things unspoken. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Thomas would stand outside Jordan's door, hand raised to knock but never knocking. He would listen for movement, for proof that someone else still shared his exile. Jordan always heard him, breathing through the thin wood, waiting until the footsteps retreated before turning toward the wall and closing their eyes. The people of Lynchburg called him a quiet man, polite but withdrawn. They spoke kindly of his tragedy, admired his restraint, pitied his solitude. None of them knew that the tragedy had not ended. It had simply learned how to breathe through him. The end of the master on. The morning of November 3rd, 1852, the elderly servants found Thomas Rutled dead in his bed. There was no struggle, no wound, no letter. The doctor called it heart failure, though privately he told neighbors it looked more like a man who had chosen to stop being alive. The heart, he wrote in his report, had simply ceased to act. The estate auction took place 2 weeks later. The house, the furniture, the silver, each item catalogued, each bid recorded. Jordan was listed last. One house servant, age 20, literate, fair condition, unusual features. They sold for $412 to a farmer from Appomattox who did not believe in curses. After that, the record ends. No more ledgers mention a slave named Jordan. No estate inventory describes such a person again. The name dissolves into silence the way smoke dissolves into fog. Whether Jordan died on that farm, escaped north, or lived to see freedom, history does not say. The pages burned at Belmont made sure of that. The silence that remained years later. Those who visited the ruins of Belmont spoke of strange sensations. A chill near the sealed room. Whispers at dusk when fog rose from the fields. They said sometimes you could hear the echo of a woman's voice, soft and broken, repeating a single phrase no one could quite understand. Others swore they saw a figure near the well at night. Neither man nor woman, just a shape watching, waiting. The truth was simpler and more terrible. The ghosts were not trapped inside the walls. They lived in the silence that replaced the truth. Every lie told to keep the record clean was another brick in the prison of memory. And so Belmont's story became what all forbidden histories become. A whisper. A warning and a wound that never fully heals. The quiet house in Lynchburg. The house on Clay Street was narrow and dark, its windows looking out on an overgrown garden where the ivy climbed higher every month. Inside lived the remnants of Belmont's ruin, Thomas Rutled's ghost of a name, 2 elderly servants who moved like shadows, and Jordan, the last witness to what had happened in that house of red brick and shame. For months after the move, the new house kept its silence. The neighbors saw little of Thomas. Once a man of society, now he appeared rarely. Only when business required it, and even then he carried the air of someone traveling through a world that no longer belonged to him. He spoke softly, bowed politely, and declined every invitation. In Lynchburg's small society, tragedy excused eccentricity. The poor man has lost his wife, people said, lowering their voices. He's never recovered. Some say she died by her own hand. Others say it was an accident. But the way he walks, you can tell the past still has him by the throat. Inside the house, Jordan moved like clockwork. They rose before dawn, lit the fires, prepared breakfast, and polished what little silver Thomas had brought from Belmont. But their movements were different now, quieter, more measured. The obedience that had once been forced had hardened into habit. But there was something underneath it, something Thomas could not define. He told himself that Jordan remained his property, that the papers in the drawer proved it. But he knew better. When he spoke, Jordan's answers were polite, but never deferential. They no longer said yes, master. They simply said yes. The difference was small, almost invisible, but it carried a weight that made Thomas's stomach twist every time he heard it. At night, he drank in the study and stared into the fireplace. Sometimes he would feel the urge to call Jordan, to speak, to demand, to confess. But the words would die before they reached his tongue. What could he say? That he was sorry? That he was lonely? That he couldn't sleep because every time he closed his eyes he saw his wife's face and heard Jordan's calm voice saying, "You did this to yourselves." He would rise, walk to the base of the stairs, and stand there, his hand trembling near the banister. Above him, the floorboards would creak faintly as Jordan moved about their room. He would listen, waiting for silence, waiting for something like forgiveness that never came. The letters no one received in March 1852, Thomas began to write again. Not in his plantation ledger, not in his journals, those were gone, but in letters addressed to no one. He wrote to Catherine, to his dead father, to God, to Jordan. He wrote apologies that never found their targets. I wanted to understand, that was all. I told myself I was a man of reason. But reason is a coward when it meets desire. Sometimes I wonder if you were sent here to show me what I already was, hollow. I burn the paper so no one will see, but the words stay anyway. They stay in the walls. He would fold each letter neatly, seal it with wax, and drop it into the fire. The old servants whispered that the master was speaking to ghosts. They weren't wrong. Jordan, meanwhile, grew quieter. The house's stillness suited them. They spent hours reading in the corner of their small upstairs room, using the worn books Thomas had left behind. Anatomy of the human form, treatises on the dual soul, natural philosophy. Sometimes, when they closed the cover, they would whisper something under their breath, a prayer or a curse. No one knew which. Harriet had once said that Jordan carried silence like a cloak. In Lynchburg, that silence became armor. 3. The visitors in early summer, a stranger came calling, a man from Richmond who claimed to be handling Wickham's affairs. The trader, it seemed, had died of fever, leaving behind records of his acquisitions. The stranger wanted to confirm a few details for legal purposes. Thomas met him at the door, expression cold. "There are no records," he said. "You've been misinformed. Sir, the matter concerns a sale recorded in—" "Leave," Thomas said, his voice low but final. The stranger hesitated, looked past him, and for an instant caught sight of Jordan standing at the end of the hall, motionless. Whatever curiosity had brought him vanished. He tipped his hat and left without another word. That night Thomas could not eat. He sat at the table staring at his hands. What did he want? Jordan asked quietly from the doorway. "Nothing that concerns you." Jordan tilted their head, studying him. "Everything concerns me, master. I'm what they came for. I'm what they'll always come for." Thomas slammed his glass down. Enough, but Jordan's eyes didn't waver. "You can burn papers, but not stories." He didn't answer. He couldn't. He left the room, and for the first time since Belmont burned in his mind, he understood that he could no longer control what survived him. The fading of Thomas Rutled by autumn. The neighbors began to whisper again. Thomas had grown thinner. His once proud bearing had wilted into something frail, almost transparent. He was seen walking alone through town at dawn, speaking to himself in the low, deliberate tone of a man rehearsing confessions to an empty church. Inside, the servants spoke of strange things. They said the master talked in his sleep, sometimes calling for Catherine, sometimes for Jordan, sometimes for no one at all. Once, the older man, Samuel, heard Thomas whispering from his study, "What are you?" The same words he had once asked on that first August morning, only this time the answer came from no human throat. Just the groan of wood settling above him. On the morning of November 3rd, Thomas did not rise. The doctor who examined him found no wound, no illness. His heart gave out, he said, though he looked unconvinced. In his private notes, the doctor added a line. The man died of absence. The servants buried him in a modest plot on the edge of town. No minister came. No family claimed the body. Jordan stood by the grave, face unreadable. When the earth fell in clumps onto the coffin, they whispered something, too softly for anyone to hear, then turned and walked back toward the house. The vanishing. The auction took place 2 weeks later. The house, furniture, and servants were all listed together. The notice described Jordan simply as one house servant, age 20, literate, of peculiar appearance. The phrase peculiar appearance was enough to keep most bidders away. Finally, a farmer from Appomattox bought them for $412. "I don't believe in ghost stories," he said. "I believe in labor." Jordan was taken away in a cart that smelled of hay and rain. The elderly servants wept. None of them ever saw Jordan again. What happened next is conjecture, stitched together from fragments of rumor and the margins of letters found years later. One account claimed Jordan was seen near Petersburg, dressed in men's clothes, heading north with a group of fugitives. Another swore a person fitting their description had been spotted in a Union camp in 1863, working as a nurse. A final, stranger tale said Jordan had returned once to the ruins of Belmont after the war, walking among the foundations and whispering names to the wind. None of these stories were proven. The record ends, as so many do, in silence. The return to Belmont by 1865, the estate was only memory. The war had torn through Virginia, leaving ashes in its wake. The Belmont property, long abandoned, was nothing but charred beams and skeletal chimneys. Local legend claimed the house had burned in the middle of the night without lightning or soldiers, that the fire had started in the sealed room itself. When travelers passed, they reported strange things, a smell like iron and rain, a faint glow under the floorboards, and sometimes, when the wind blew from the east, a voice that sounded both male and female, whispering, "I endure." Superstitious folk said it was Catherine's ghost. Others said it was Jordan's. A few said it was both, bound together forever in the house they destroyed, and that destroyed them in return, severed. What remained, by the time county historians tried to trace Belmont's lineage in the 1880s, almost nothing remained. The court records from 1852 had been sealed by special order. The church register listed Catherine's death as accidental. The ledger from Charleston Market was missing. Its August page. Only a single artifact survived. A brass key, unearthed by a farmer's plow near what had once been the garden cottage. Its handle was engraved with the initials TR, and its teeth blackened by fire. It opened nothing. The farmer kept it for a while until his daughter began waking at night saying she heard someone knocking at her door 3 times, softly, patiently. After the 3rd night, he threw the key into the Appomattox River. Some say when the moon is low and the water is still, it glints on the riverbed like something waiting to be claimed again. 8. The last entry a century later. A historian researching Virginia's lost estates wrote in her journal, "Every reference to Belmont vanishes between 1852 and 1865. It's as though someone decided the place should never have existed. But the stories persist. In every version there is a figure, neither man nor woman, always silent, always watching. The witnesses disagree on everything except the feeling, grief, guilt, and something like pity. Perhaps the ghost isn't Jordan at all. Perhaps the ghost is the story itself, condemned to repeat until someone listens without trying to own it." The historian never finished her manuscript. She moved away from Virginia the next spring. The notes she left behind end with a single line, written in a hurried hand. They were right. The room is still locked. I returned to a vanished place autumn 1872. The war had been over 7 years, but Virginia still wore its wounds like fresh bruises. The land was changed. Not just the fields and fences, but the very air, as though memory itself had curdled into the soil. A surveyor named Jonathan Harker Winslow came riding down the old Prince Edward Road one gray afternoon, following orders from the county registry. His task was simple on paper: measure the boundaries of a forgotten tract once known as Belmont Estate, now tangled in forest and silence. The locals had warned him. "Don't go there after dark," they said. "The place doesn't stay empty." Winslow had laughed. He was a man of modern mind, trained in geometry, not superstition. But as he followed the rutted path that once led to the Rutled tobacco fields, the laughter died quietly in his throat. The woods grew dense around him, ancient oaks and black pines leaning inward like conspirators. The road disappeared, replaced by a tunnel of green light and dead leaves. Then just as the day began to sink, the trees parted. And he saw it, the ruins of Belmont. Only fragments remained, a stretch of brick wall streaked black with soot, a pair of columns standing like sentinels, and a stone well choked with vines. The foundations of the house were barely visible beneath decades of moss and earth. Winslow dismounted, the smell of damp ashes still lingering as though the fire had been recent, not 20 years gone. He unpacked his instruments, spread his papers, and began his work. But even as he measured, he felt watched. The wind moved strangely through the ruins, not rustling but whispering, carrying syllables that refused to form words. At dusk, he found the remnants of a staircase leading nowhere. The steps were warped, the iron nails eaten with rust. Beneath the largest oak nearby, he noticed something half buried in the soil. A hinge and a sliver of wood blackened on one side. A door. He realized with a slow chill that it must have belonged to the sealed room. The surveyor knelt, brushing dirt from the hinge when he heard it. Faint, rhythmic, unmistakable. Knocking 3 times, soft, patient, coming from the earth itself. The night watcher, Winslow, made camp near the old well, telling himself the sound had been an animal. But as darkness thickened, he found no rest. His horse snorted and stamped nervously, ears twitching toward the ruins. The air felt wrong, too still, too expectant. Near midnight, he rose and walked toward the foundations. The moon filtered through the trees, washing the broken brick in a silver pallor. Somewhere above, an owl cried once, then fell silent. He reached the spot where the staircase ended and stopped. The ground was colder there. His lantern flickered, though there was no wind. He could see the faint outline of the 3rd-floor footprint, where Catherine Rutled had died, where the key had turned for the last time. Then behind him, the sound again, 3 knocks. He turned sharply, the lantern swinging. No one, only shadows among the oaks. He forced a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "It's the echo," he muttered. "The echo of my own damn boots." But the next sound wasn't an echo. It was a voice. "You shouldn't be here," Winslow froze. The voice was neither deep nor high, male nor female, and yet somehow both. Calm, measured, unhurried. "Who's there?" he demanded, raising the lantern. The light touched nothing but air. Still the voice answered. "You've disturbed what was meant to stay buried." He turned in a full circle, heart hammering, the beam catching the edge of the ruined chimney. "Show yourself." And then he saw them, a figure standing where the moonlight fell, tall, slender, clothed in something that seemed woven of shadow and dust. The face was unreadable, blurred as if by mist, but the eyes were deep and human, and full of a sadness so immense it made him step back. "Who are you?" he whispered. "No one," the voice said softly. "Everyone who was never allowed to be." Then the light went out. The testimony of a survivor. 3 days later, Winslow stumbled into the county courthouse in Farmville, pale and trembling. He carried no instruments, no papers, only the brass compass he had found in the ruins, now cracked clean down the middle. "I saw someone at Belmont," he told the clerk. "Someone still living there." The clerk frowned. "Impossible. That place burned in '65. I tell you I saw them. They spoke to me." "What did they say?" Winslow hesitated. The words felt fragile, unreal when spoken aloud. They said I shouldn't be here." He was dismissed as unwell, suffering from fever or drink. The official report simply noted, "Survey incomplete due to illness of agent." But later, when Winslow returned to his boarding house, the innkeeper's wife noticed something strange. His hands were covered in ash, though he swore he had not built a fire. That night he tried to sleep, but the knocking returned, not from the ruins now, from his room. 3 taps on the inside of the window pane. When he opened the shutters, no one was there. Only the faint imprint of a hand, small and delicate, left in the condensation. He wiped it away, but in the morning it had reappeared. He left Virginia the next day, for to return. Fee, the keeper of the key. The story might have ended there if not for a woman named Martha Gaines, a freedwoman who worked as caretaker for the church cemetery near the old Belmont Road. She was the one who found the brass key by the creek in 1875, blackened by age, engraved TR. She kept it on a string around her neck, calling it the ghost's key. Neighbors laughed, but Martha was not a woman to scare easily. "Some spirits don't haunt out of anger," she told them. "Some haunt because they're waiting to be heard." One night in October, she walked to the ruins carrying the key and a lantern. The forest was quiet except for the murmur of frogs near the marsh. She stood where the house had once been and spoke aloud. "If you're still here, tell me what you need." For a long moment, nothing. Then faintly the wind shifted, and the smell of tobacco smoke drifted through the air, mixed with something colder. Martha raised the key and the lantern flame flared. "What do you want?" she asked again. The voice came softly, barely more than breath. "Remember me." The light dimmed. The night went still. When she returned home, the key was gone from her neck. From that day forward, people said Martha changed. She spoke less, prayed more, and kept fresh flowers at the edge of the ruined road. When asked why, she would only reply, "Because somebody there deserves the kind of peace they were never given." V. The church record in 1878. Christ Church recorded an unusual entry. Donation received from an anonymous benefactor, $20 for the repair of gravestones, and one note, for those buried without names. No one ever claimed the gift. But when the sexton opened the envelope, a small brass key fell out, polished to a faint golden shine. The key was placed in the church safe, where it remains to this day. The inscription is still visible under the right light. TR, some nights the sexton swore he could hear faint knocking from inside the safe. 3 times. Always 3 to 6. The historians note, "When I, Eleanor Price, began my research in 1901, I thought Belmont was just another plantation swallowed by history. What I found instead was an absence, a deliberate erasure. The county archives from 1851 to 1853 are missing entire volumes. The church ledger from those years ends mid-sentence. The surviving family correspondence speaks only in euphemism, the matter of the third-floor tragedy, and then there were the letters. In the attic of the old Lynchburg house, I discovered a bundle of papers sealed in wax, unsigned, half-burned, but written in the unmistakable hand of Thomas Rutled. They spoke of regret, of guilt, of a presence that lingered. One line struck me cold. I feel her at night, not Catherine, not Jordan, but something that remembers both. It knocked softly on the walls as if asking to be let in. I kept one of the letters. The rest I returned to the box and sealed again. But lately I hear noises when I work, tapping from the bookshelf, the faint rustle of pages turning themselves. Sometimes when I dream, I see a house on fire that refuses to burn completely. And in the smoke a figure stands, neither man nor woman, watching. Always watching this seventh. The legend of the oaks today. Nothing remains of Belmont but the oaks. Their roots run deep through brick and bone alike, drinking from the same ground that once held so much sorrow. Locals say that if you walk there at dusk, you'll feel it. The change in the air, the heaviness of stories unspoken. Some hear weeping. Some hear laughter. Some hear only silence, the kind that follows when truth has been buried too long. But once in a generation, someone hears the knocking. 3 times, soft, patient. And if you listen closely after the last echo fades, you might hear a whisper following it. Neither plea nor curse, but something more enduring, more human. I am still here. And the discovery October 19th. 901, Richmond, Virginia. Dr. Eleanor Price, professor of historical anthropology at the College of William and Mary, had spent 15 years studying the aftermath of the Civil War, migration, burned estates, and the vanishing archives of plantation records that no one wanted remembered. But Belmont was different. She had first heard the name in an old county meeting transcript. A fleeting reference marked no file. The absence intrigued her, so she followed it, as scholars do, until absence became obsession. Her colleagues warned her to let it go. Some histories vanish for a reason, they said. People forget what they must, but Eleanor was not made for forgetting. When she arrived at the Lynchburg registry that autumn morning, the clerk, an old man named Mr. Varnell, greeted her with a puzzled frown. "You're the second person this year to ask about Belmont," he said. "The second?" she asked, tightening her scarf. "Yes, a gentleman from Boston. Left no name. Spent a week looking through the deeds. Left pale and shaking. What did he find?" The clerk shrugged. "Nothing. Same as you'll find. Some things don't like to be found. That night?" Eleanor sat in her rented room with the fragments she had gathered. The burnt ledger entry, the coroner's note marked misfortune, the anonymous donation to Christ Church, and the half-burned letters she had discovered weeks earlier in the attic of the Lynchburg house. She spread them across the table in a rough order, and then, without warning, one of the pages moved. The paper shivered in the still air, curling as if touched by unseen fingers. She froze. No window was open. No draft stirred. Then, faintly, from somewhere beneath the floorboards, she heard it. That soft, deliberate rhythm. 3 noxig fium. The visitor at the door at first, she tried to explain it away. Old houses shift. Wood settles. Imagination fills the rest. But when the knocking came again, closer this time, from the door itself, she rose and opened it. No one stood there. Only the narrow hallway, silent and dim, the oil lamps flickering like hesitant breath. She returned to her table, heart racing. Her eyes fell on the letter from Thomas Rutled, the one she had kept instead of burning. I feel her at night. Not Catherine, not Jordan, but something that remembers both. It knocked softly on the walls as if asking to be let in. As she read, the ink bled, slowly, like fresh writing spreading over old. The lines deepened, words darkening before her eyes until new ones appeared beneath. "You are listening now." Eleanor dropped the page. The sound echoed too loud in the small room. Her rational mind, trained on evidence and logic, screamed against belief, and yet something deeper whispered. "You've opened the door." She lit another lamp and began to write. 3. The journal begins to write back October 21st. "I've decided to document everything. The phenomena are real, auditory, kinetic, possibly electromagnetic. It feels unscientific to call them hauntings, but the term suffices for now. October 22nd. The knocking comes only when I read aloud. Always 3 times. Afterward, the ink on the letter shifts, faintly, like breathing through paper. October 23rd. I dreamt of a burned staircase and someone standing at the top. Not a ghost in the romantic sense, but a presence, luminous, sexless, watchful. I felt neither fear nor peace, only the terrible recognition of something unfinished. October 25th. I read Thomas Rutled's confession again. This time another line appeared at the bottom in unfamiliar script. Ask the key what it remembers. The church, the brass key in the safe. I must go there, a fool. The return to Christ Church. It was a cold Sunday morning when she reached Christ Church, Farmville, the same church where Catherine had been buried half a century earlier. The sexton, an old black man named Elijah Brooks, welcomed her kindly but grew uneasy when she mentioned Belmont. "Ma'am," he said, "some doors were meant to stay shut. That key's one of them. Please," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with more than academic hunger. "I'm not afraid of doors." Elijah studied her face for a long time, then sighed and fetched the key from the safe. Wrapped in linen, warm to the touch though it had been locked away for years, its surface gleamed faintly under the candlelight. The engraving was clear. She took it in her palm. Immediately, the church seemed to tilt, as if the world itself had taken a slow, uneven breath, and then she heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. Not from the door this time, from the floorboards beneath the altar. Elijah stumbled back, crossing himself. "You hear that too?" Eleanor nodded. "It's not calling for you. It's calling for me. V. The chamber below." They pried up the boards near the altar, reluctantly, reverently. Beneath lay a narrow stone passage leading down into earth. The air was heavy, damp, alive with the smell of mold and iron. Lantern in hand, Eleanor descended first. The key in her palm pulsed with faint warmth, as though guiding her. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small vault. Dust hung thick in the air. In the center stood a wooden chest, its surface carved with the same initials, TR, and a second smaller engraving beneath, CR. Plus. J. Eleanor's throat tightened. Catherine Rutled and Jordan, she inserted the key. It turned with a soft click as if it had been waiting. Inside the chest lay only 3 things: a lock of pale hair bound with ribbon, a folded sheet of parchment, edges burned, a small mirror cracked clean down the middle. She unfolded the parchment. It was written in 2 hands. One was Thomas's, precise, desperate. The other was unknown. The letters slanted, elegant and strangely fluid. "To whoever finds this, the truth of Belmont is not in death but in what we created by refusing to see. We thought knowledge could cage what God himself left wild. We were wrong. If the house still stands in memory, it is because memory refuses to be buried. Every silence, every omission, these are the bricks of its walls. When the knocking comes, answer it not with fear, but with witness. Let me be remembered as I was. Not an object, not a sin, but a soul that endured." J. Eleanor read it twice, then pressed the page to her chest. The lantern flickered, and for a moment she thought she saw a figure reflected in the cracked mirror. A silhouette behind her, neither man nor woman, smiling faintly. "Is it you?" she whispered. The air stirred. The knocking came once more, then faded. Guy. Disappearance itself. When Eleanor returned to her room that evening, she placed the parchment on her desk beside the old letters. She meant to copy it, to file it, to make it part of the record. But as she set down her pen, the flame in her lamp leapt higher, too high. The parchment caught. She tried to snuff it, but the fire raced across the words faster than ink could record. Within seconds, the page was gone, leaving only black dust in the shape of an open hand. In her diary, she wrote, her hand trembling. It burned itself. As though the story does not want to be told, only witnessed. That night, the knocking didn't come. Instead, a single whisper filled the silence. "Thank you," she wept. Not from fear, but from understanding. 7. The final entry, November 1901. Belmont is gone. Yet it breathes through every silence that follows it. I believe now that ghosts are not the dead, but the truths we bury alive. The story will not rest because it was never given a grave, only a lock, a key, and a witness. If anyone reads this, remember, the knocking does not demand terror. It asks for acknowledgement. Listen, that is all it ever wanted. She closed her notebook, placed the brass key atop it, and blew out the lamp. In the darkness, faintly, came the sound again. 3 soft knocks. She did not open the door this time. She whispered, "I hear you," and let the silence answer back. Epilogue, 1938, decades later. When the estate's ruins were finally cleared to make way for a state road, the workers uncovered nothing but fragments, scorched bricks, melted glass, and one unbroken mirror, buried face down beneath the oak roots. When they lifted it, their foreman swore he saw his own reflection staring back with 2 sets of eyes, one his, one not. He dropped the mirror and it shattered in the dirt. That night, the new road flooded for the first time. Locals said it was bad engineering. Others said Belmont had finally been disturbed for the last time. But even now, on still nights when the wind moves through the oaks, travelers say you can hear it, that same sound beneath the whispering leaves. 3 knocks, soft, patient, eternal. I endure. Go to see the return of the name Autumn, 1938, 87 years after the slave ledger recorded that fateful entry. 1 specimen, age approximately 19. The name Belmont found its way back into the public record. The Virginia Department of Historical Preservation had begun a statewide project mapping former plantations for possible restoration, memorialization, or sale. When a young researcher named Charles H. Delaney unearthed a faded county map with the word Belmont scrawled across an unmarked tract, he assumed it was another lost estate destroyed during the war. But the more he searched, the stranger it became. No family records, no wills, no lineage, only the phrase written in heavy ink beneath the property's boundary line, "Do not disturb." Delaney, ambitious and skeptical, laughed when older clerks told him to leave it alone. Ghost stories don't fill ledgers, he said, but unclaimed land does. By early winter, he had assembled a small crew and set out to survey the site, the same ground where oaks now grew thick as a cathedral, and where no bird dared sing after sundown. They arrived just before dusk. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of frost and damp wood. Beneath the tangled roots and creeping ivy, Delaney found the blackened stones of what had once been the Belmont Mansion's foundation. "Mark it," he told his assistant. "We'll clear the site in spring." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, listen." From the hollow beneath the largest oak came a sound, soft, deliberate, impossibly human. 3 knocks. Delaney rolled his eyes. Probably a woodpecker. But as they packed up their equipment, one of the men found something half buried in the loam, a brass key, green with age, still bearing the letters TR2. The broadcast 2 months later, a regional radio show called Echoes of the South invited Delaney to discuss his discovery. The host, eager for an audience, introduced the segment with theatrical flair. "Tonight, we uncover the mystery of the vanished Belmont Estate, a plantation so cursed, even history itself forgot it." Delaney chuckled into the microphone. "Superstition dies hard in these parts, but we're bringing reason back to the story. There's no curse, just lost records, human error, and time. But something happened live on air that no one could explain." As he spoke, the sound engineers noticed interference. A faint tapping, rhythmic, persistent. "Knock, knock, knock." "Loose wire," Delaney muttered, tapping the microphone. "We'll fix it." But the knocking grew louder. The lights flickered. The recording needle etched a sudden spike across the wax disc. Then a voice broke through the static. Low, calm, neither male nor female. "Remember me." The studio plunged into silence. Delaney sat frozen, the microphone still humming softly. The episode was never aired. The master disc was locked in a storage room in Richmond, where it remains to this day. But sound engineers who've played it claim that the voice returns at exactly 13 minutes and 13 Durgan, the same time the key in Delaney's pocket was said to have grown warm. The Museum of Shadows by 1950, the ruins of Belmont had become a curiosity. The state opened a small exhibit titled Virginia's Lost Plantations in the Farmville Historical Museum. Among the displayed items, a rusted nail, a fragment of mirror, and the very key recovered from the site. On opening day, visitors crowded the small hall. Children giggled, couples whispered, and flashbulbs flared. But as the final tour ended, the janitor locked the room and turned to leave. Then he heard it, faintly, from behind the glass case. Knock, knock, knock. He turned back. The glass had fogged over from the inside, and across it, in slow, deliberate lines, 3 words appeared, written in condensation. I am here. By morning, the museum director ordered the key removed from display. Humidity damage, he said briskly. But the staff refused to enter the exhibit alone after dark. The incident was never publicized. But word spread as it always does, and by the late 1960s, the story of Belmont had transformed again. No longer a tragedy. No longer a history, but a haunting legend. Filmmaker 1971, independent. Documentarian Evelyn Harper arrived in Farmville with a grant from the Library of Congress to film The Vanished Estates of the UI. Outh, her assistant mentioned Belmont casually, as the one place locals won't talk about. Naturally, Evelyn went there first. The ruins were overgrown, the oaks enormous, their roots swallowing brick and bone alike. Evelyn set up her camera near the well. The light was dimming fast. Action, she whispered, adjusting the focus. But the reel jammed, then unwound on its own. She checked the crank and it was turning backward. The camera began recording in reverse, as if the film itself wanted to undo what it captured. Later, when she developed the footage, every frame of that minute was inverted, trees bending inward, shadows rising instead of falling, and in the center of the image stood a figure, neither man nor woman, barefoot, watching the camera. The negative caught fire in her hands. Evelyn was hospitalized for burns. When she recovered, she refused to speak about Belmont again. Her final note on the project simply read, "The past doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs witnesses. V." The modern excavation. By 1993, the area around Belmont had been purchased by a private development firm intending to build luxury homes. When excavators began clearing the site, they found layers of charred foundations, and beneath them, something unexpected. Human remains, 18 skeletons, male and female, some wearing shackles, others buried hastily without coffins. Among them, one body unlike the rest, smaller bones, finer structure, but with fused pelvic characteristics that baffled the coroner. The report described it as anomalous, undetermined sex. The discovery halted construction immediately. The press dubbed it the Hermaphrodite burial, though the state quickly suppressed the name. The remains were transferred to the University of Richmond for study. Within a month, the lead anthropologist resigned without explanation. The bones were never publicly displayed. The site was declared a protected historical zone and sealed once again. No homes were ever built there. The Digital Resurrection 2020. Belmont returned, not in books or broadcast, but online. A small history podcast called Forgotten South released an episode titled The Rutled Affair. It drew from Eleanor Price's unpublished notes, leaked from an academic archive. Listeners reported strange occurrences. Phones freezing at the 13-minute mark, audio glitches forming words. One listener, a woman in Boston, claimed she heard a whisper through her headphones saying her own name, and then the words, "You've read enough." The producers took the episode down within a week, but clips survived, shared in dark corners of the internet. The waveform of the recording, when viewed visually, showed a pattern: 3 peaks, 3 valleys, 3 knocks for 7, the return of the knock today. Belmont exists in pieces: a ruin beneath oak roots, a locked drawer in a museum, a corrupted sound file, a missing journal. But those who study it say the same thing. Once you know its name, it knows yours. Visitors who wander too close to the old site on moonless nights say the air changes, thicker, heavier, alive. The oaks creak though there's no wind, and if you stay long enough, you'll hear it. 3 soft knocks. Some say it's the spirit of Jordan, the enslaved soul who endured both cruelty and curiosity. Others say it's the echo of Catherine's confession, repeating through time. A few whisper that it's not either of them, but the story itself, seeking listeners so it can live again. Whatever it is, the sound never fades. It doesn't beg or threaten, it simply persists. Knock, 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 a reminder. A heartbeat, A history that refuses erasure. 8. The last words in 2024. A graduate student named Naomi Reyes submitted her thesis, The Belmont Paradox, Haunting as Historical Resistance. In her final paragraph, she wrote, "What haunts us is not the ghost of Belmont, but the act of forgetting. The past does not die when its people do. It dies when we look away. Every story silenced becomes a room sealed in perpetuity. Every silence is a locked door waiting for 3 knocks." On the night she turned in her thesis, Naomi dreamed of an old house burning. In the flames, a figure stood at the window watching her calmly. When she woke, her laptop screen was open to a blank document. At the top, in faint gray text, were 4 words she hadn't typed. "Thank you for listening, Ein. The house that never dies, Belmont, is gone from maps, but not from memory. The ground still hums with what it once held. Love twisted into obsession, cruelty disguised as curiosity, the blurred edge between sin and survival. No one knows where Jordan's story truly ended. But the whisper remains, traveling through time, ink, wire, and glass, reaching anyone who dares to listen. If you ever pass through Prince Edward County, and the wind grows still among the trees, pause and listen closely. You may hear it too. 3 knocks. Soft, patient, unending, and then a voice, ancient and human, rising from the ruin and the roots alike. I endure. The Restoration Project, October 2029. Prince Edward County, Virginia. Nearly 2 centuries had passed since that night in 1851, when Thomas Rutled wrote in his ledger, "One specimen, age approximately 19. Now, a new generation stood at the edge of the forest where Belmont had once burned. The Virginia Historical Reconstruction Authority had approved a grant to build a memorial on the site, a modern glass and steel structure dedicated to the lost voices of the antebellum South. The project was led by Dr. Miriam Holt, a cultural archaeologist known for her forensic reconstructions of destroyed heritage sites. When she arrived, the ground was damp with the first rains of fall. The oaks still loomed enormous, their roots gripping the earth like ancient hands. Drones hovered overhead, scanning the terrain, while excavators traced the faint outline of Belmont's original foundations. Miriam's assistant handed her the first discovery of the morning, a shard of charred glass, its edges smooth as if melted by intense heat. "Window pane?" he asked. Miriam turned it in the light. Within the glass, bubbles had formed in strange symmetrical patterns. 3 vertical ovals evenly spaced. "Not a window," she said quietly. "It looks like fingerprints." The air shifted. For a moment she thought she heard something moving through the leaves. Not footsteps, not wind. Something between them. 3 knocks, soft, deliberate. Sue. The archives that shouldn't exist. That evening, Miriam returned to the mobile office trailer to log the day's finds. Her digital assistant, AVA, a voice-driven AI catalog system, processed her notes aloud. Belmont Excavation Day 1. Artifacts cataloged, glass fragment, charred metal key fragment, unidentifiable bone matter. Category uncertain. Miriam paused. "Key fragment? We haven't logged any key." "Correction," Ava replied. "Key artifact registered under accession number 1847 Bell TR." Miriam frowned. She hadn't created that number. The format matched no current system. AV display the record. The tablet flickered. A single image appeared. An antique brass key engraved with TR, polished, pristine. Below it, a short description, auto-generated by the AI. Owner, Thomas Rutled condition. Active status, unlocked. "Unlocked?" she whispered. The system shut itself down. The door beneath the roots. By the second week of excavation, they had cleared most of the upper soil layers. Beneath a tangle of oak roots, one of the interns uncovered a stone surface unlike the others. Smoother. Deliberate, carved. "Dr. Holt, you need to see this," the intern called. She knelt beside the stone. Etched into it were words so worn they were barely legible. "Seal what should not speak," and below it, in smaller script, a symbol. 3 concentric circles intersected by a line. They cleared further. Beneath the slab lay an iron trapdoor, fused shut by time and rust. Miriam ran her hand along its edge. "Get the torch," she said. But before anyone could move, the metal groaned. The rust split on its own, like something beneath had been waiting for air. A breath of cold wind rose from the gap, smelling of earth and tobacco smoke. The team stepped back, frightened. "What the hell was that?" someone whispered. Miriam didn't answer. She leaned forward with her flashlight. The beam fell on a narrow staircase descending into darkness. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw movement below, a reflection or a shape or a face. And then the sound came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it came from inside the earth. Fool. The descent, the official report, would later say that only one person entered the chamber. That is true. Miriam ordered the team to remain topside and descended alone, camera on, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The staircase was steep, carved from stone, slick with condensation. The air grew colder with each step. She counted 12 before reaching a narrow landing that opened into a small vault. Her light caught the glint of metal. Dozens of rusted objects scattered across the floor, surgical instruments, burned shackles, and the remnants of glass jars that had once contained something long gone. And at the center of the room stood a wooden chair. On the chair rested a human figure, or what was left of one, bones clothed in remnants of fabric. Around the neck, a tarnished chain held the same brass key seen in the AI archive image. It gleamed faintly, though no light touched it. Miriam approached slowly. The figure's skull was tilted upward, as if it had been waiting. In its hand, impossibly, deliberately, was a folded sheet of paper. She pried it loose. The paper didn't crumble. It was as fresh as if written yesterday. It read, "I waited long enough for someone to come who would listen without owning. If you have found this place, then you are the last witness. The house does not die. It remembers. Tell them what you saw." J.A.'s she read, the key fell from the skeleton's neck and landed at her feet. Then the lights went out. V. The recording only one camera survived the collapse that followed. The footage, later confiscated by the historical authority, begins in darkness. Then the frame stabilizes. Miriam's flashlight flickers across the vault. She whispers something faint. "You're not forgotten." And then, captured clearly, audibly, undeniably, comes a voice. "I know." The ground shudders. Dust fills the frame. Crash. Silence. When the feed returns, the chamber is empty. No skeleton, no key. Only the folded paper, pinned beneath a single stone. The excavation team found Miriam's equipment near the entrance hours later. She was gone. The footage was leaked by a technician 2 years later, and circulated briefly online before being taken down. But in the audio spectrum of the final clip, sound analysts found a repeating pattern, 3 frequencies, 3 peaks, 3 knocks, thanks. The reappearance December 2031. A janitor cleaning the basement archives of the Farmville Museum found something unexpected on a shelf labeled uncatalogued. A brass key. Engraved Tiaret was warm to the touch. Next to it, a sealed envelope addressed in looping handwriting. For whoever listens next. The letter inside contained only one line. Belmont breathes in the act of remembering. As long as one voice speaks the story, the house stands. The janitor turned in his resignation the next day. Beath. The present day. Now. In 2045, the Belmont site is fenced off. Overgrown once more. The state lists it as historically unstable ground. No official memorial stands there. Only the oaks remain. But every October, when the air thickens with the same damp weight it carried in 1851, visitors report strange phenomena. Phones recording voices that whisper their names. Cameras failing near the foundations. And always, always, the knocking. Some say it's Jordan. Some say it's the land itself, rejecting silence. Yet one fact endures. Every person who's heard the knocking leaves changed. Some weep, some pray. Some never speak again. And some, the rare ones, return to write. Because Belmont no longer needs walls or brick or fire. It lives in words, in memory, in the human need to tell what should have been forgotten. Every retelling is another room. Every listener another door. Every breath another echo. The last knock in a quiet university library in 2045. A student researching Southern hauntings opens an old data drive labeled Belmont Archive, 1901-2031. She double-clicks. The screen flashes once. then black. Then white, the speakers emit a single soft sound, unmistakable. Knock, knock, knock. A voice follows, calm and endless. You found me. The lights flicker. Now remember. And the file renames itself, Belmont Estate Never Dies 9. The house in the mine Belmont cannot be rebuilt, because it was never just a place. It was, and remains, a question. What happens when the past refuses to stay buried? When the forgotten demand not revenge but recognition? When history itself begins to speak? The answer comes softly, in every generation that digs too deep or listens too long. The house that burns still breathes, even now. In the hush between midnight and dawn, if you listen closely, you might hear it, through your walls, through your screens, through your own heartbeat. 3 knocks, soft, patient, eternal. I endure.